Right after I got the job, Jonathan said to me, so now I know we haven't spoken about this, but we have the, and I knew right before he even said it, and I just said, yeah, I'll do it. I do it. You know, how can you pass up an opportunity of being nude on Rodeo Drive? I mean, it just doesn't get any more exhilarating than that.
I don't remember where we came up with the gag that when the cop came up to Kristanna's car that her breasts would enlarge, but somehow the idea happened and we decided to do it. And then we turned the actual mechanical problem of making it work over to Alan Hall, who was in charge of all the practical effects. She had this inflatable air bladder, and we started inflating it, and then she was trying to keep a straight face, and then of course the thing exploded, and everybody cracked up. It was the shape-shifting kind of thing that could look like a human being, and the next point be like a puddle on the floor. If that failed in its mission, then Skynet is going to have to send back something even more dangerous, and that was the concept that guided the development of her character.
What we had to create with the TX was an advanced machine that had weapons that were far advanced from anything from the T-800, the T-1000 for that matter, whereas the T-1000 could shape-shift and do all of these different things. The TX had plasma cannons that could blow buildings up.
She is stronger, she's faster, she's smarter, more sophisticated, has more tricks up her sleeves, has more weapons on her that she can produce in no time that are deadly weapons or blow up, literally neighborhoods. I don't think that she can be really eliminated.
Unlike the past Terminators, she's a female, so she can use her femininity and certain attributes to achieve her goals in other ways that the past Terminators haven't. So that's kind of a fun thing to play with.
I made one big mistake going into this movie, and that was assuming it would be pretty easy to find an actress to play the TX, because I thought, how hard could it be to play a robot? I mean, it just basically suppress your emotions and act like a robot. And what I found as we started the casting process is these actresses would come in, and they all felt like they were play acting it being a robot, but none of them really felt like they really were a robot. And it sounds like a silly statement almost, but you almost had to be in those casting sessions to understand what I mean. We started hiring casting directors in Europe and New York and Chicago and all these other places. And at the end of it, we'd seen 10,000 actresses. There was not even a second choice. It was just her. If we'd not found her, I really don't know what we would have done in the movie.
Jonathan put a list of girls, put them on tape for our approval and everything. And we looked. When her turn came in on the tape, boom, it's like she was saying, it's me, take me. I mean, she was perfect.
Right off the top, everyone agreed that this was the best. She was really the best for this part. Now, when we actually saw her perform after all the rehearsing and the stunt coordinating and this and that, and she was working with the stunt coordinators and with the people that were training her with weights and the people that were training her with for flexibility and for this and for jumping and all of those kind of things, she really sold the character 100%.
And to me, storyboards have pluses and minuses. The obvious plus is that it's a wonderful tool for helping to schedule and budget a movie, to show somebody a picture is worth 1,000 words. So when you're sitting with in a pre-production meeting with all your heads of departments, you can say, look, it's got to look like this. This is what's going to happen. So that's a really terrific thing about storyboards. The negative about storyboards is that sometimes it can lock you into certain ways of thinking, and it can sometimes suppress the spontaneous creativity that has to occur in a film set. That's often the difference between things seeming mechanical and finding those little unexpected moments of magic. The other thing was that the visual effects should always be in service of story. We would never do a visual effects shot because it would be a cool bell and whistle by itself. It always had to be servicing the story. And I was really lucky to have, as my visual effects supervisor in this movie, Pablo Hellman, who shared exactly the same philosophy.
Early on, I learned that I just had to do the best job that I could possibly do. And to do that, I needed the best crew at ILM and the best ideas, and I think we have done that. The most challenging part of my job is actually accomplishing somebody else's or even your own vision and working with people to do it. But it's also the most rewarding part.
At the time that we did this movie, very little work had been done with what we call digital doubles. In other words, replicating an actor entirely in a computer and tricking the audience to thinking that it's really the actor that's in the scene when in fact it's a computer-generated image. And we were forced to do it in several cases in this movie because we had stunts that were so dangerous that not even a stunt person could do them, let alone the actor themselves. So for example, in the hearse chase, we established Kristanna on the car, but once the real heavy-duty action starts, that we filmed a hearse without anybody on it, and then what you see on top of there, even though it looks like Kristanna, it's actually a computer-generated image of Kristanna. So every movement she has is all calculated and discussed, and it's all animated. The way the light reflects off her jacket, the way that her hair moves in the wind, those are all things that are discussed, planned, designed, and then executed by an army of computer artists and technicians.
There are a couple of points in the movie where the TX's arm turns into a flamethrower. So in pre-production, we did a test to see if we could do it practically or if it made more sense to do it as a computer-generated effect in post-production. What we ultimately wound up doing was doing it in post-production, but this became the model for how we wanted it to look, and we actually filmed some of these tests and then used those as digital elements to incorporate into the shots.
I just don't understand that. I mean, my feeling about a set is it should be like any work environment. It should be calm. It should foster the best work out of people. Lines most associated with Arnold Schwarzenegger. It started as a throwaway, the bathroom is only about a minute of screen time, but it took about 7 days to shoot it because the complexity in the stunts was that we could rarely have both actors in the same shot. Usually, one actor was throwing the other one through a wall. So typically what it would be is Arnold would be holding a portion of a torso, which would represent Kristanna's body, and he would throw it toward the wall. The wall would later digitally be destroyed, and a digital double of Kristanna would be put in place of the torso. And the same thing worked in reverse when she was doing things to Arnold. It's very complex. You have to plan the whole thing well in advance, know what all the shots are. There's a shot where Arnold is pushing Kristanna, and these doors are accordioning shut, and that's all practical. There's a tremendous amount of post-production. Some of those shots take 6-7 months to complete, even once you finish filming, because of all the interaction between the actors and the digital double and the destruction of the wall that you're doing. There's very few shots that are simply live action with no digital, and there's very few shots that are purely digital. It's really kind of a mixture. There's a moment in the fight between the TX and the Terminator where they fall through the ceiling. They're kind of holding each other, and then all of a sudden the TX's legs swing around and her head swivels. And it would seem like, okay, well, what's so complicated about that? Well, a lot of little details emerge. For example, her jacket is, it's got a collar and a vest and all that, and it's facing a certain way. So that's her front, and suddenly has to become her back. Well, how's that transition exactly going to happen? And when you start getting down to the actual details, because you're going to see it, then, those all become questions. Well, how do you do it that it doesn't start to look fake? And we had to play with that shot a lot to make it kind of go smoothly and again, seem photorealistic, because you're always up against the edge where it goes from seeming like a real thing that you photographed to just kind of like magic, and then all of a sudden it just feels like it's some sort of a fake computer effect. Jeff Mann, our production designer, came up with an ingenious solution for the particle accelerator set. In the script, it was, this 2-mile long, giant radius that they're having this chase in. And in fact, if you watch the movie, it seems like we probably built, a good mile length of this set. In reality, it was only about 150 feet. And what Jeff did was he went back to like his high school geometry book, and he figured out the radius that you would have to have.
It was challenging to come up with a radius that was self-editing to build enough of the set so that you could be at one end and have their characters running away from you and not see off of itself.
The way it worked was as the actors came to the end of the set, it would be just enough curve that you couldn't see the beginning of it. And when we were back at the beginning of it, we had a giant mirror there, and so we angled the camera so that you didn't see the reflection of the actors' backs, but it gave the illusion that, again, the set went twice the length of what it actually was. So even though it was only 150 feet, it gave the illusion of being much longer. Probably one of the most technically complicated shots in the movie from ILM's point of view was a shot where the TX is trapped up against the particle accelerator, and her liquid metal exterior is literally being pulled off of her by the magnetic field. That shot doesn't seem like it would be all that complicated, but that shot required not only the best resources that ILM could throw at it, they wound up having to go to particle physics experts at Stanford and Caltech and running all sorts of very sophisticated computer models to get the computer to do that. And the wonderful thing about a company like ILM is a smaller company might go, well, that shot's too complicated, change it. Whereas ILM said, you know what, this is something we can't do right now. Let's expand our field of knowledge, and even though we'll lose money doing that shot, we'll know how to do it, so in future movies, if we're called on to do something similar, we'll be able to pull something like that off.
All the training was really important to actually getting that strength.
Almost any shot that has CG in it requires a fair amount of advanced planning. You have to know what it is that you're going to shoot and what you're planning to have occur in the scene. Now, that's not to say you can't make changes later, but you have to have a pretty good sense of what the shot's going to be. So usually it means you should have a storyboard, or sometimes what we call an animatic, which is like a crude animated version of the shot. When you're doing a film like this, whenever you can shoot something practically, in other words, you photograph it and the shot's done, that's preferable because generally speaking, that's usually much cheaper than resorting to visual effects shots where one shot could cost you $100,000. So what we tried to do in that sequence under the blast door is do as much of it with the animatronic characters as possible. We had a TX replica and a Terminator replica created in Stan Winston Studios that were incredibly photorealistic, and there's a team of sort of puppeteers manipulating them to do certain actions. But the reality is that there was sort of a limit as to how effective that looked. And a number of those shots are still in the movie, but what we realized is we're going to have to resort to visual effect shots here that we were sort of trying to avoid, but there was no other way to get around some of these shots other than doing it in the computer, and that's what we want. In any movie with a villain, you want to make the villain as dangerous and scary and indestructible as possible because that just raises the stakes for your good guys. So in this movie, we had as our quote-unquote bad guy, the TX, which we tried to create the idea was indestructible, and you could make the liquid metal exterior go away, but you still had this battle-hardened tank underneath. So the question is, how are you going to destroy it? In this film, it seemed the best way to do it was, frankly, you probably have to nuke it, and then we realized, well, the great thing is if we can make it be part of Arnold that does it, and there's some sort of great little symmetry in that. And so that's exactly what happens in the film. He takes out this blast battery he has inside of himself, and we've already established that it's essentially got the power of a nuclear weapon, and he shoves it down her throat, and that's the end.